Hey everybody, it's Nathan Selove with another edition of Autism Actually Speaking. Today I got a special guest. She is a mother of an autistic and she also has autism herself. She is a blogger and she runs the Facebook page Autistician. And in her own words, she is a reveler and sole compatriot of the unboxed mind. Welcome, Dallas Brogden.
Thank you.
To get right into it, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you specifically is because you talk a lot about the different experiences that people face on the spectrum based on gender. So how would you describe your work in discussing how women on the spectrum uniquely face challenges?
It's interesting that you bring up the gender aspect, because when I did start the page, originally the page was called Aspergirl Inside, based off of the book Aspergirls by Rudy Simone, I'm a huge fan of her. And I was late diagnosed. I didn't find out that I was autistic until after my daughter was, because it was in filling out those evaluation forms that I started ticking all of those boxes off in my head.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is really, because, the questions always ask you if you've noticed any abnormal behavior. Well, no, none of her behavior was abnormal to me because I was also autistic and I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
So I was 38 when I was officially diagnosed, after she was, and I waited. I kind of suspected from the time that she was about 4 that there was something going on. So immediately I launched into research, reading everything I could, talking to friends that turned out had autistic children, some that I've actually known since high school, and I didn't know that they had autistic kids.
And
they
how old
were
was she?
tremendously helpful. She is about to turn 13.
No, how old was she when she got her diagnosis?
6 officially, but I started noticing when she was about 4.
So
I noticed that there was a disconnect when she would play with other kids. There seemed to be a disconnect in communication. Like, she would respond, but not to what they were saying. She would respond with whatever she wanted to say that didn't necessarily relate to anything they were trying to talk to her about.
Yeah.
She was very social. She's my polar opposite in that respect. She's very extroverted. I am very introverted. And that also can be a determining factor that is the reason a lot of girls get missed for diagnoses, because they can talk, they chatter, they're social. They want friends. They want to participate. They're actively engaged in things. But there are those certain key hallmarks that they look for that indicate autism.
So when it comes to masking, would you say that you were able to develop masking techniques automatically throughout your life? Or would you say that it was easier for your daughter to have done it because she had a diagnosis at a younger age?
Much easier for her, because I've been very vocal with her about her diagnosis. It probably would have been, and I wrote about this on the page not too long ago, actually. I think about everything that I encounter, that I observe from 3 standpoints: from an adult autistic woman, from the perspective of a parent of an autistic child, and also as the autistic child of a mother. So, and it's an automatic thing. It's not like I say to myself, I make a deliberate choice, okay, let me examine this from all 3 angles. It just automatically happens. So I feel 3 different perspectives kind of all at once, and they tend to meld together sometimes. But I think that growing up, it would have been much easier for me to navigate the social confusion, or the social circus, as I like to call it, if I had known. I think it would have improved my ability to communicate with my mother, because we fought so much and it was all miscommunication. Because I get hyper emotional and I start crying. I can't control it when I get upset. It's just automatic waterworks. Yeah. And that frustrated her, because she didn't understand why I was getting so emotional. And it wasn't necessarily the subject that was making me emotional. It was the frustration, because I couldn't effectively communicate to her what I was thinking or feeling or needing.
As you talked about, women often find other ways of masking, and also there's more pressure to fit in for women. Would you say that it's primarily sociological, and why, in your words, do you think that might be?
I think a large part of it is sociological. I think also that the diagnostic criteria has improved over the years dramatically. That's why we're seeing an emergence of diagnosed girls and women who are autistic.
Yeah.
There's also, how did someone put it? And I cannot remember her name. I apologize profusely to this person, whomever you are. She coined the phrase internalized presentation, not female autism, but internalized presentation. I really like that, because when we get into the intersectionality of gender and view gender as a spectrum, because you've got non-binary, you've got trans, you've got, people who are traditionally heterosexual or hetero-female, male, it really runs the gamut. But those characteristics for autistic people can overlap, and it goes across the gender spectrum. So there's really not a female phenotype or a male type. That's why I really liked it when she came up with that. So I've kind of started to remind myself to not refer to it as autism in girls or women, but more internalized or externalized presentation. Stereotype is that boys are more outwardly apparent of being autistic.
Yeah.
They tend to have more aggressive or more physical demonstrations. But you know what? I remember being a kid and having those outbursts. And it was not limited to boys. I was in 5th grade, and one of the most horrendous memories that I have of my childhood that I am horrified that I ever have to talk about, but I think it's important to bring it up, is how entrenched we can be in what the rules are and how strictly we adhere to them, to our own self-moral code. And I remember being in the 5th grade and the teacher hounding into us that we were to stay in our assigned seats. Now, you, me, most every adult understands by now, most of us, that means just sit at your desk. That included my chair. And I was not cute like Sheldon was on The Big Bang Theory when anybody sat in my seat. I remember a classmate bringing her younger sister to visit. They had some kind of thing going on at school, and she was allowed to visit her sister in 5th grade. And I had been out of the classroom for whatever reason. I went to get water, the bathroom, I don't care, it didn't matter. But I came back, and the little girl was in my seat. And because the teacher had hounded into us the importance of staying in your seat and how much trouble we would be in if we got out of our seat without permission, then I'm sorry, but that little girl had to move, because that was my seat and I was not going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And nobody explained to me that it doesn't matter about the chair. It's just a matter, you can grab another chair. The chair is irrelevant. Nobody told me that.
Yeah.
Because nobody knew then how to explain that to a kid. More been known about autism, specifically relating to young females, then that might have been different. But I wrestled this child out of that chair, and I've carried that guilt for 35 years, because it was a horrible thing to do to a small kid.
Yeah.
But, there was like, it's not your chair. I'm like, yes, it was, because we remember the characteristics of what is ours. We know intimately our own things.
Yeah.
I knew where the scratch marks was. I knew how it wobbled. It was my chair.
Yeah. I've been known to, I've been known to get on people's case when they take my chair. So I can definitely relate to that. So switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about your work and what you do with both the Facebook page and your blog. First, tell me a little bit about the blog.
The blog, I've always written. That was the only way that I could communicate. And for years, for probably all of my teenage years, that was the only way I could communicate with my mother, because we couldn't talk. I couldn't get the words out. And if you ask anybody who remembers me from high school, they're like, she was always so damn quiet. That's the key. It would shock everybody when I answered in class, because I just didn't speak. I would watch people. I was trying to figure out how they knew how to respond. Like, is there some kind of script that you guys get? Because I didn't get that script, and I don't know how to respond to certain things. Just anything. It could be anything at all, any kind of conversation. I would watch the girls, and it would make them uncomfortable, because I would be staring at them trying to figure out how they knew how to answer. But so I would write letters to my mom. She and I would have these big blowout fights, and I would stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, sheets and sheets of letters, and I would hide it in her purse. So I would ambush her, because I didn't want her to see it before she got to work, So once she got to work and she read it, then she would come home and we could talk then. And then it didn't matter if I cried, because she had the letter. She had the words already. So that was how I learned how to communicate, was through writing. Writing is what really helped me find my voice. And for the longest time, I was scared to show anybody what I wrote in my journals because I knew that if anybody ever read it, they would lock me up, throw away the key. I was straight for Bedlam. And it wasn't until 2001, and I'm 30 years old, and I had a friend of mine who was Scottish, and back then, you know, we had the internet, we didn't have Skype. You had like ICQ and that little whistle that they, the little thing. Everybody knows the ICQ sound. So that was what we used to communicate. And not many people had cell phones either, but she called me from Scotland to yell at me. She was so mad you couldn't even understand her. Her brogue was so thick. She called me selfish. She said I had no business hiding anything that I wrote if I wrote like that. And the one thing that I had sent her was this little rant that I wrote about, you know, relationships and how men and women, men sometimes tend to fall prey to manipulative women. And it was very troublesome for me because I seemed to run into those guys at the time that were already being manipulated by a woman. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. They cannot. So I wrote a nice little rant about it. And I sent it to her. And she called me up and she said, what else have you done? And so I started sending it to her. And that actually opened the door for me to learning web design because she's the one who got me thinking about publishing, about sharing what I wrote with people, that maybe it wasn't such a horrible thing to have my words known, that maybe there were people who could identify with what I thought and what I felt and the frustrations that I went through. But back then we had Yahoo GeoCities and Angel Fire, and those were all controlled by someone else. And I didn't want my work plagiarized. Yeah. So again, there's that rule-bound philosophy for us. We don't, you know, what's ours is ours. And if you're going to do it right. Follow the rules. Don't steal somebody else's work. So that got me into web design because I wanted my own place to publish. That way I could control who saw it. Yeah. And slowly but surely I started finding other people who felt the way that I felt about things.
And did the Facebook page come like as an extension of that?
After my daughter was diagnosed and after I was diagnosed, I remember working at a car dealership, and the gentleman that everyone and their brother swore was my male twin said they pushed us together. They said, y'all should date. So I was like, okay. So we went out for a little while, and it was a phenomenal disaster because we really kind of were too much alike to date. Yeah. And he actually just made the joke one day. He said, you really need to make a do's and don'ts page for dating a woman with Asperger's. Yeah. You know, because that would have been my diagnosis. They had just removed it from the DSM-5 like the year prior to my diagnosis. So I was diagnosed autistic. But had it still been available, it would have been Asperger's. Yeah. All right. So that's how the Facebook page came about. And of course I had kept up my blog, and so I just kind of shared things from there. And nice. Then I say it was Facebook. The Facebook page helped me find other autistic people, and then my views slowly changed. You know, I remember when you approached me about doing the collaboration, you asked me what my thoughts were on Autism Speaks. And of course my answer is undecidedly the devil's incarnate. But it wasn't always the case, because when you're a newly diagnosed person or when you're a parent of an autistic child, of course, they are one of the largest organizations in the U.S. Yeah. And they spend billions of dollars funding their propaganda fear-mongering machine. So that was the information that I had. And even my friends who had picked up on the signs and talked to me about it, they had encouraged me to go to Autism Speaks. Nobody knew about the Autism Society really back then. It wasn't as prevalent, not even the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. So I was Annie Oakley. I was going to paint the whole town with blue Kool-Aid. I was going to light it up blue. Yeah. I would shoot water pistols up and down the street with blue Kool-Aid. Yeah. And like I said, making the Facebook page brought other autistic people to my awareness. Yeah. And I started making friends, and I started talking to them and noticing. And it was in listening to them that my perspective changed. Yeah. That I began to really embrace what it means to be autistic, because I was terrified. I was every autism mom ever. Yeah. You know, I was scared. I was like, what can I do? We need to get rid of it. Because I was thinking about myself too. I was like, I would love to be able to get rid of some of these things. I would love to be able to get rid of autism.
Yeah.
As hard as that is to admit, that was my thought, because I still had a lot of internalized hatred.
Yeah.
Because of the way that I had been raised and the things that I had been taught were horrible about myself. And learning from these other autistic individuals like Emma Dalmain and Fiona O'Leary and Jules Edwards, who runs Autistic Typing, they have become some of the most stalwart friends that anybody could ever have. And they have guided me. They have listened to me. They smacked me upside the head, figuratively speaking, saying, Dallas, get your head out of your butt. Yeah. When I needed it. It's like, I love you, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
And then, but they would explain why I was wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a very tough love kind of friendship, but they've always been behind me. Every time I have a question, I know that I can go to them and I will get the truth.
So I wanted.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, I think that you provide a very good perspective, because I have a lot of adults on the spectrum in my audience, but I also have a lot of parents of children on the spectrum, and it's really nice that you kind of come from both worlds, so you are able to understand the intricacies of autism, because you also have it yourself, while also understand raising someone who was on the spectrum. So I really appreciate that perspective. One last question that I wanted to ask you before we finish up here. More of a this is your chance to make a statement. So as someone who did kind of fall on the side of, autism speaks good, cure good, autism scary. What would you say to people that are still sort of on the fence? They're at the point where they do still see autism as not being necessarily a good thing, and they do hear messages like that of Autism Speaks and think, that does appeal to me. As someone who can change their mind on that attitude, what would you say to them?
No, what I would say to parents of autistic kids who are dealing with that, who are just kind of beginning to emerge, and even some who are still entrenched in the idea that Autism Speaks is a good thing, or that autism is something to be scary. I have a good friend of mine that I met in a parenting group that's run by an ABA therapist, of all things. I think she's a lovely woman. She and I have extremely fundamental differences of opinion on ABA. She's one of those that still insists that she doesn't do the old ABA, that it's not like that. It's not abuse. It's just, and I'm not going to argue with her. I'm not in that group anymore. But one of the friends that I made, she is the mother of twin boys, both autistic. And she had actually posted with this piece. She was asked to write a piece for another parent blog on acceptance of autism. And hers was a very resigned acceptance. And because language matters so much to us, we get so bogged down and entrenched in wording and verbiage that the words that we use, because we know how powerful those words are. I remember her writing, and the phrase that struck me was that she had originally seen autism as this nasty, dark, spiraling beast waiting to jump out at any moment. And that's a scary thing to read from a mom of autistic kids. You want to jump on it and say, no, please don't ever say that again. But I approached her, I think, from a more educational standpoint, because that's my job. I want to educate people. And a lot of these parents that are, quote, the traditional autism mom, I think that with the right approach and the right education, their perspectives will change. It's a slow process, but it's forward movement. So she and I had a talk, and I explained to her, I was like, I would really love to explain to you why I think that that's probably a dangerous thing to say, or why it's harmful to say. And I laid it all out for her. And a few months ago, she sent me the finished piece, and it had nothing in there but positive acceptance. There was no resignation anymore in her words. And the best thing for me was that she told me, says, that it was because I have gotten to know you, and because I read your page and you have taught me so much that I don't see this as something to be resigned to for the rest of my life anymore. So even though I had run a page for autistic girls and women, the information still goes, again, across the gender spectrum, because it helped this friend of mine, this mother of boys who were already teenagers, and her perspective could still change 16 years later. So the education is important, and the approach is important. I think that's probably the key point that I would want anyone to take away, is that talking to autistic adults, autistic parents, because the thing is, we didn't magically gain these skills. We didn't, suddenly become non-autistic or automatically gain the ability to mask even. Yeah. And some of us still can't mask for anything, and I still have trouble with it. And I actually have gone the other way and have worked to try to reverse that. I refuse to mask anymore. Yeah. Because I want people to see me as I am, even with the difficulties that I face in my everyday life. Because I think it's important to realize that at some point we were their kids. We did have the violent outbursts. We did have censoring. We did have, the self-destructive behavior. My own daughter went through that. She would scratch and bite herself whenever she would get upset or have a meltdown. And it took a long time to kind of teach her how to cope with it other than hurting herself.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dallas, so much for joining us. This has been a great discussion. If you want to learn more about Dallas's work, you can go to the Facebook page, Autistician, and she'll be posting links to her blog on that. And I will have that linked down below, as well as a link to her blog. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was fun. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, so I'm pretty excited.
And that's today's video. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like, a share, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. If you're willing and able, support me on Patreon. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like addressed, please leave them in the comments below. Or message me on my Facebook, also linked below. And remember, if you follow the commands of an authority figure to a fault, you might be autistic.